As the DCEU expands, so does everyone's anticipation to see what heroes will be given a movie or TV series. But with every hero's story being told, there's also gotta be a villain, and there are so many to choose from. These are the top 10 Batman villains we want to see in the DCEU. At number 10, we have the Joker. Now, I know he's already been portrayed in the DCEU, but I wanted to put him on the list because I don't think his portrayal should end with how he was depicted in Suicide Squad, nor should it continue that way. In my opinion, I think there's a good chance for the DCEU to redeem this character with another iteration of the character. Now, even if you disagree with me on that front, I still think that this character has gotten so much attention in visual media over the last 20 years that it might be time for other villains to get the same treatment. But if we're going to include Matt Reeves' recent Batman movie in this list, which I'm going to do for simplicity's sake, it appears as though, spoiler alert, a Joker character is being hinted at for a sequel anyway. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very excited to see what they come up with, which is why the Joker still makes this list. But I also couldn't help but feel like this was a missed opportunity to bring an underrepresented villain into the DCEU. Like another one on this list, perhaps. Man-Bat. This villain has to be one of the creepiest and most traditionally horror-based bad guys in the Batman universe. This bat-human hybrid creature first appeared in Detective Comics number 400 in 1970, making him a pretty classic villain that we don't often see reimagined in Batman stories. He's kind of like Batman's Curtis Connors, if you will, being a monstrosity that was accidentally derived from unstable lab work. He even comes in and out of sentience in later storylines, showing a sympathetic side at times since, after all, there is a scientist somewhere in there. I think it would be really cool to see how a director would go about incorporating villains so visually striking into the DCEU. It would be a great challenge for visual effects artists, and I'd personally love to see his close-ups using practical makeup instead of CGI. It feels like the DCEU has a chance to bring back the campiness of early 2000s practical effects in a tasteful way, don't you think? I think. Alright, at number 8, we've got Poison Ivy. This villain needs to be introduced into the DCEU, and there's some chatter online that this is basically inevitable. Not only is the villain just a hugely prominent player across the Batman universe, but her appearance could also have a pretty interesting social commentary on the state of the world. Poison Ivy is an eco-terrorist, for those of you who don't know, using her hybridized plant DNA to keep Batman and other heroes at bay. And if she were portrayed in a modern DC movie, I think it would be really cool to see how the climate change discussion could be woven into the narrative. I'd honestly be interested to see her as the central figure of a whole movie's conflict personally, because her influence is also enormous, having the ability to use her pheromones to control the likes of Superman himself. It's a good opportunity for the writers of a new Batman universe movie or episode to work in a timely and powerful conflict for Bruce Wayne to overcome. At number 7, it's Solomon Grundy. This zombie villain isn't exclusively a Batman villain, having first been a bad guy to the Green Lantern and also to Superman. Solomon first appeared in a 1987 issue of History of the DC Universe and based on one of those super depressing old 19th century nursery rhymes. His origins have differed over the years, but the general consensus is that when he was alive, he was a criminal type named Cyrus Gold, who was murdered in a swamp and his body left there to reanimate years later. I think he'd be a great addition to a future Batman film because with his association to Green Lantern and Superman, he can be used as a through line to tie a bunch of superhero storylines together as the DCEU expands. Not only that, but zombies also tend to sell pretty well in film and TV. Maybe this is a good way to bring DC zombies to the big screen. I'd love to see that personally. At number 6, Clayface. This villain would be very cool to see in a modern Batman movie or TV show due to both his backstory and just the way he looks. Clayface's backstory deals in the world of film, so it's no question that this character would have a ton of potential for a spot in the DCEU. I mean, Basil's descent into insanity comes from being replaced in a remake of a film he'd originally starred in. So maybe this adds a cool meta element to the DCEU. Fans seem to love how far Marvel went with their meta commentary, so maybe DC could do the same. Or more simply, this could just allow the director to delve into whatever the Hollywood of Gotham would be. And maybe that could open a door to commentary on real-life Hollywood, bringing us even closer to Gotham's realities as a city. Aside from all this, Clayface might just offer another cool opportunity for visual effects artists to go to town on his face folds. I'm a sucker for practical effects, what can I say? At number 5, there's Ra's al Ghul. This guy is such a huge Batman villain in the comics, I'm surprised he hasn't appeared in the movies yet. Ra's is hundreds of years old and uses any means necessary to change the outcome of the future to suit his wishes. He thinks he's doing good for the world by using extreme deadly force against any evildoers, which is a really complex motivation that kind of makes him border on anti-hero. And that's one of the reasons why he'd be a good addition to the DCEU. With a lot of this list consisting of somewhat fantastical villains, Ra's comes off as more of a human character. And with his complex motivations, it makes him a writer's dream when it comes to adding drama to the script. It also might open a door for DC to explore the history of the DC universe by delving into the hundreds of years of Ra's past. The Lazarus Pit is also a great motif that could create some pretty cool conflict among good and evil characters in the DCEU. My casting choice would be Daniel Day-Lewis, by the way, since you didn't ask. That is if they can convince him to come out of retirement, of course. At number 4, there's Hush. This is one of my favorite villains in the Batman universe, and I think he'd make a great addition to the DCEU. Hush is a childhood friend of Bruce Wayne, also growing up very wealthy. But the difference was that Hush, aka Thomas Elliot, hated his parents to the point where he tried to kill them. Hush goes on to become an enraged villain wrapped in surgical bandages wielding 2 pistols who hates Batman. Now, he doesn't seem to me to be enough of a powerful character to drive a whole movie, but I imagine he could fill in a supporting role very well if given the chance. In Matt Reeves' Batman, there appears to be an Easter egg that might hint to Hush as a potential villain in sequels to come, as the Riddler is revealing to Batman that, spoiler alert, his own father was responsible for an innocent man's death. The word hush appears on the screen for a moment. And who is that innocent person? A reporter with the last name Elliot, just like Hush. Bit of a stretch? I don't know, I think that was intentional. So maybe my wish will come true in some form, even if you still don't consider Matt Reeves' Batman part of the DCEU. At number 3, we've got Scarecrow. Although he appeared in the Dark Knight trilogy played by a favorite of mine, Cillian Murphy, these movies aren't really considered part of the DCEU. This means that this villain is a free agent for future DCEU projects where he would hopefully be depicted in a bit more of a grand fashion. This villain has been around since 1941, first appearing in World's Finest Comics number 3, so however he'd be worked into a future film or TV show would need to be as grand and impactful as he is in the comics. I think it would be so cool to see how they'd incorporate his fear gas. Like, what would it look like to see the public or even Batman lose their minds to fear in a contemporary context? Like, what would an artificial instillment of fear on the public look like in a more modern Gotham? Perhaps this could be a good chance for commentary on the current human experience and give the DCEU a bit more groundedness. I don't know, maybe their MO is to keep things more detached from reality, but that's the sort of direction I'd like to see them go, personally. And Scarecrow and his abilities might just be a great chance to do that. Okay, at number 2, Jason Todd. Where has Robin been in the DCEU? This popular question seems to be answered simply by the fact that adding Robin might be too campy. The sidekick trope could come off as seeming a bit too old-fashioned, and this might just be what's holding the folks in charge from making it happen. But whatever you think of Jason Todd, he is the Robin that I think could ground the character in a contemporary setting, considering his darker look, motivations, and insecurities. This also opens the door to build a strong through line in a TV series or set of films. I mean, the event of Jason's death at the hands of the Joker is pretty powerful, and if done right, could also build up to a really sweet resurrection in a later sequel or episode. Robin doesn't have to be this quick-witted, bright-eyed sidekick. He can be dark, he can be vengeful, and he can add some really great drama to any DCEU project with his complex relationship to Batman. And if you're thinking, no Ben, it should be Damian Wayne or Tim Drake, well, Damian, as much as I'd love to see him too, would require Batman to be old enough to have a son. And Tim Drake, he's awesome in the comics, but he just doesn't have that dark edge that Jason Todd does. And as for Stephanie Brown, okay, fine, she'd be cool too. Either one. And finally, at number 1, it's Mr. Freeze. Where has Mr. Freeze been? he hasn't even been alluded to or hinted at all. Other than Matt Reeves suggesting that he might be interested in exploring the character for a Batman sequel, there's been really no talk of him for the DCEU. Maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger's portrayal scared producers away from considering him because of how silly he can come across. But I really think this character could pose an awesome challenge to see how he could be toned down and modernized for a new appearance. I love this character. He's one of the most nostalgic villains for me, and his backstory falls into that category where you have so much sympathy for him that you almost want him to win sometimes. I just think the DCEU has a chance here to harken back to the early 2000s Batman and Robin nostalgia and make as much of a change with Mr. Freeze as they did with Joker or Batman himself. What would a toned down, darker version of Mr. Freeze look like? I genuinely want to know. Plus, it would just be cool to see how they would work with the visuals for the ice gun. What would the ice beam look like, and how would they justify such insane technology on a more grounded, pseudo real world setting? Alright, so that's my list. What did you think of it? Did you agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I have been your host, Ben Ball. Please enjoy social media responsibly, but follow me on Instagram if you'd like, and as always, stay nerdy.